Welcome to Libyth. I'm glad you're here. This week we are in Heian Japan with the Tosa Diary, written by Tsurayuki. To understand why Tsurayuki hid behind a woman's voice, you need to understand what it cost him not to. And to understand that cost, you need to understand the system that set the price. Heian Japan was not chaotic, it was exquisitely ordered. It was a world in which position was legible, in which the seating of a guest, the script of a poem, and the weight of a gift all carried precise social information. The order was so complete, so articulated in ceremony and protocol, that it became a kind of pressure, not the pressure of violence, but the subtler, more persistent pressure of a grammar that told each person what they could say, in which language, and to whom. Tsurayuki was a man educated to speak that grammar fluently. The Tosa Diary is, among other things, a record of what happens when a man decides to step outside it. Power in Heian Japan derived its legitimacy from two sources that were formally united and practically separate. The emperor sat at the sacred center. His presence fixed ritual, his lineage authorized the cosmic order, and his court was the spatial and symbolic apex of the state. This was the formal arrangement. The practical arrangement was different. Real leverage, the kind that determined who received which posting, whose daughter became empress, whose grandson became regent, pooled not in the emperor's hands, but in the hands of the Fujiwara clan. The Fujiwara had built their authority through a mechanism so elegant it barely looked like power. They married their daughters into the imperial line. A Fujiwara daughter became consort. If she produced a son, that son became emperor. The Fujiwara grandfather became regent. Over generations, this pipeline from marriage bed to throne produced a structure in which the formal authority of the emperor and the actual authority of the Fujiwara regent coexisted. The first sacred and symbolic, the second practical and decisive. The emperor legitimized, the Fujiwara governed. This split between formal and actual authority produced a particular kind of social grammar. Court rank was the public face of the system. It was visible, it was codified, it mapped onto everything. Where you sat, how you were addressed, what kind of gifts were appropriate for your station, which ceremonies you performed and which you attended. Rank was the legible surface of a society whose real workings were less legible, organized around marriage alliances, patron-client chains, and the quiet accumulation of private landholdings called shun. The ritsuryo system, the Tang-derived administrative framework that organized the central government into ranked ministries and sent officials to govern provinces, was the formal architecture. But the formal architecture was increasingly a shell. Inside it, the Fujiwara had built something more durable, a network of personal obligation and marital connection that operated through the rituals of rank while being independent of them. You could read the rank. You could not always read the network. That gap between what was visible and what was operative is where political tension lived. Tsurayuki inhabited that gap in a specific way. He was a man of genuine cultural prestige. He had compiled the Kokinshū, the first imperially commissioned anthology of Japanese poetry, an achievement that placed him among the most significant literary figures of his age. But prestige and power are not the same thing, and the ritsuryo system was careful to keep them separate. His rank was middling, educated, visible, present at ceremonies, capable of being sent on important assignments, but not inside the inner circle of Fujiwara influence. He could not enter through the marriage pipeline. The Kai clan while old and literary, carried no gravitational pull comparable to the Fujiwaras. His ceiling was structural, not personal. It was the ceiling that applied to talented men who lacked the right clan affiliation, and no amount of poetic achievement would raise it. What cultural prestige could do was something different and more fragile. It could make you legible, could keep your name in circulation, could protect you from total obscurity. It was a form of insurance, not a form of advancement. The provincial posting to Tosa was the structural expression of that position. The ritsuryo system assigned mid-rank officials to govern provinces as a matter of administrative duty, but the assignment was experienced as exile. Tosa was distant, the far end of Shikoku coastal, cut off from the capital's patronage networks, its culture, its social rhythms. To be sent to Tosa was to be sent out of the community that constituted meaning for a man of Tsurayuki's class, because the court was not merely a workplace. It was the only meaningful community his class possessed. The capital was where poets were known, where reputations circulated, where the social ties that determined the texture of a life were maintained and renewed. Distance from the capital meant more than inconvenience. It meant a progressive erosion of presence, a slow drift out of relevance. The governor of Tosa was simultaneously an official of the state and a man cut off from the very world that gave his official status meaning. That double condition shaped everything about the diary's departure scenes. The Ju document, the paper that formally transferred authority from the outgoing governor to the incoming one, was not just an administrative instrument. It was the material object of a man's career displacement, his release from one posting and his re-entry into the system's flow. When Tsurayuki received it and moved toward the ship with his household, the ceremonies that surrounded that movement were doing two kinds of work at once. On the surface, they were affirmations of the state's continuity, assertions that the system of governance was intact, that authority passed cleanly from hand to hand. Underneath, they were exposures of a mid-rank man's dependency. He needed those ceremonies because they were the only public proof of his existence within the system. The gifts, the poems, the formal leave-takings, these were the grammar by which his rank was acknowledged, and without them, he would have been simply a man on a boat. The gift economy that the diary documents so precisely is the economic base of this social order made visible in its daily operations. Tosa produced rice, fish, and the tax revenues that the governor extracted on behalf of the state. That extraction was the administrative function that justified the posting. But the diary almost never describes the mechanics of extraction. The tax rolls, the local administration, the dispatches to the capital. What it describes instead is the gift economy that ran alongside the official economy and did a different kind of work. The horses and sake and pressed sweetfish and long chests of food that moved between people at the moment of departure were not generosity in any uncomplicated sense. They were instruments of obligation, tokens that acknowledged debts and created new ones, performances of affiliation that told the watching community how each participant stood in relation to the departing governor. To give well was to signal sincerity. To give poorly was to signal distance. To give with precisely the right object in precisely the right manner was to speak fluently in the language of rank. The Fujiwara no Takazane who sent the Uma no Hanamyuke, an odd gift for a sea voyage, a horse for the road when the road was water, was making a statement through the incongruity. The gift's very inappropriateness to the situation was the point. It signaled that the giver was performing the full protocol of respect regardless of practical utility, which was a way of saying that the relationship mattered more than the circumstances. Every gift in the diary operates this way, as a compressed statement about the relationship between giver and receiver, and the diary records them with the care of a text that understands gift-giving not as sentiment, but as a system of social adhesion that requires constant maintenance. The Shun accumulation that was slowly transforming Heian Japan's economic structure is less visible in the diary's daily texture, but forms the background against which the gift economy makes sense. Private estates accumulating to Fujiwara hands meant that the formal tax structure of the ritsuryo state was progressively losing its grip on the land. The governor's role as tax extractor was becoming more complicated, more dependent on local networks and private negotiations, more exposed to the kinds of corruption that happened in provincial offices far from the capital's oversight. The diary's erasure of administrative content is not naive. It is a deliberate choice to record the human surface of a system rather than its bureaucratic machinery. And that choice itself reveals something about where the diarist thought significance lived. The family structure that underlies the diary's grief is not incidental to these political arrangements. It is their human consequence. Heian marriage among the court class was uxorilacal. Husbands visited wives' households rather than wives moving into husbands. Children were raised in their mothers' families. This arrangement had consequences for identity and for grief. When Tsurayuki was posted to Tosa, he took at least some of his household with him, and the daughter who died in Tosa died not in the home where she belonged, in the maternal household in the capital, but in a distant province. She died in the wrong place, among people who were not her kin, far from the networks of belonging that would have given her death its proper social shape. The grief in the diary is therefore not only grief for a dead child. It is grief inflected by displacement, by the administrative logic that sent a family to a province where their dead could not be properly mourned. That inflection is crucial because it connects the personal to the structural. The daughter's death in Tosa is not simply an accident that happened to a man who was also a government official. It is the human cost of a system that sent mid-rank men to distant provinces, separating them from their communities and their families' proper geography. The grief that drives the diary is grief produced by the system's operations, not merely grief that occurred within them. And this is why the choice of kana is not merely stylistic. It is a choice to record the human cost that the system's official language, Chinese, formal, administrative, has no vocabulary for. The official record would note the date of departure and the successful transfer of authority. The kana diary notes the girl who died in Tosa and the mother who keeps forgetting and asking where she is. The clan structure reinforces this reading. The Kai clan was old and literary, carrying enough prestige to make Tsurayuki's name recognizable and his Kokinshū compilation credible. But clan affiliation in Heian Japan was not merely a matter of lineage pride. It was a practical determinant of the career options available to you. Fujiwara affiliation meant access to the marriage pipeline, to the regent's patronage, to the inner networks of the court's actual power. Kai affiliation meant something else: a literary tradition, a reputation for cultural seriousness, a position in the hierarchy of prestige that was real but not translatable into the hierarchy of practical power. The ceiling this created was not a glass ceiling in any modern sense. It was a structural feature of the system, a design consequence of building authority through marriage networks rather than through merit or appointment alone. Talented men without the right clan affiliation found themselves in a specific predicament, valued enough to be used, restricted enough to be contained. Writing in kana was the lateral move available to a man in that predicament. If upward mobility through the ritsuryo system was blocked by clan affiliation, cultural authority of a different kind could be claimed through the choice of script and voice. Kana was the script associated with women's private writing, with emotional registers, with the domestic and intimate sphere that the official world officially dismissed. To write in kana was to step sideways out of the rank system and claim a different kind of authority, one that was precisely unofficial, precisely private, precisely the kind that could record what the official record dropped. The irony is profound. The choice that appeared to diminish Tsurayuki's standing in official terms was the choice that produced the most significant literary document of his age. The lateral move turned out to be the only direction in which the truly important work could happen. The social tiers that the diary makes visible are worth dwelling on because they complicate any simple picture of Heian court life as a rarefied world of aristocratic refinement. At the apex sat the imperial family and the Fujiwara inner circle, whose lives were organized around the ceremonies and marriage negotiations that reproduced their power. Below them moved mid-rank officials like Tsurayuki, educated, culturally sophisticated, present at the margins of power's center. Below them again were the provincial administrators and local populations who appear in the diary as the background against which the court drama is performed. The oarsmen whose boat songs about spring fields and credit debts are recorded with the same care as the governor's formal verses. The Awaji woman whose single unschooled line moves the shiplord more than anything the educated poets produce. The diary collapses those tiers in its attentiveness. It gives the oarsman's song and the governor's poem equal space, and that collapse is itself an argument about where truth lives. The ship party that forms for the voyage is a temporary community assembled out of administrative necessity and dissolved by arrival. And it operates as a micro-society that briefly reorganizes the usual rules. On the boat, children compose poems alongside officials. The Awaji woman's verse beats the courtiers. The seasick and the healthy share the deck. Shared danger and shared tedium create the temporary comunitas that the capital's permanence cannot produce, because the capital's permanence is also the capital's hierarchy. On the boat, you cannot always tell by seating who holds rank. The sea doesn't care about the ritsuryo system, and the boat accommodates everyone in the same physical space. That provisional equality is what makes the ship party's small songs and shared prayers legible as human solidarity rather than mere entertainment. And it is exactly what makes the diary's recording of those moments significant. Tsurayuki captures the solidarities that the official record has no interest in preserving. The community the diarist wrote toward, the capital, the court, the world of patronage and poetry and prestige, had continued without him in his absence. That continuity is not comforting, it is revealing. A man who leaves for a provincial posting exits the network, and the network closes around his absence. When he returns, the house that was entrusted to a caretaker has been allowed to decay. The patronage connections have shifted. The social landscape has rearranged itself in ways that his presence might have affected. The return to Kyoto that the diary moves toward is not a return to the world that was left behind, because the world does not wait. It moves by its own logic, which is the logic of the power networks that do not require any particular individual's presence to continue operating. The Fujiwara system runs, the shun accumulate, the marriages are arranged, and a mid-rank official returns from Tosa to find that his house is broken and the world has not noticed. That discovery is the diary's political conclusion, though it is also its personal one. The system that sent Tsurayuki to Tosa, that gave him the Ju document and the ceremonies of departure, that organized the gift exchanges and the poetry recitations. That system did not protect what mattered to him while he was away. It is not that the system failed. It is that the system was not designed to protect those things. It was designed to extract taxes, transfer authority, maintain hierarchies, and reproduce Fujiwara dominance. The small human things, the daughter's life, the house's integrity, the maintenance of the garden, were outside its concern. And the diary, written in the script, the system dismissed, using the voice the system designated as minor, records exactly those things that the system had no interest in preserving. That is why the kana choice is a political act, and why the political act is also a mourning practice. That's all for today on Libyth. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe, one new book every week. At least we try.